Absolutely. It's my pleasure.
So the first question I have for you is, how did Star Trek, especially the original series, inspire you?
Oh, it was hugely influential and inspired me, from childhood. I mean, my interest in space started with the Apollo missions, actually. I remember Neil Armstrong landing on the moon, my parents gathering the family in the living room to watch it. And I was 5 years old. And from that point on, I was just riveted whenever there were spaceships on TV. So I watched the Apollo missions and the launches and the recoveries and the moonwalks. And then anything that had a spaceship on it, I wanted to see. So I found Lost in Space. And then somewhere in like third grade, I found Star Trek, and it just changed my life. I mean, it really opened me up to science fiction in general. It gave me a sense of morality and ethics. It influenced the way I thought about politics and the world, and what it meant to be a hero, what it meant to be an ethical human being. And I was fascinated with the big ideas of it, and the technology, and the fundamental idealism of it, and the characters, and the universe itself. The way that Star Trek implied this larger group, this federation of planets, and this sort of big picture idea of how the galaxy was run, and technologically and culturally. And I was just in love with it. I watched it obsessively, and I was a fan, from childhood to this very day.
Well, I remember reading that your favorite episode of the original series is Conscience of the King. Is that still
Yeah,
true?
that's true. That is my favorite. Yeah.
And you actually tried your hand at writing a novel about it.
I did. Wow. Yeah. I tried that start and stop that a couple of times in high school and then college, and maybe once or twice, maybe a couple of times after that, before I actually started working at Star Trek. I wanted to tell the story of, young midshipman Kirk, who had gotten marooned or shipwrecked or something on Tarsus 4, and was there when the revolution happened and the genocide began. And it was, I always wanted to tell that story. I thought that was a fascinating part of his past that was alluded to, and that there was a lot more to explore there.
I would love to read that novel someday. That would be so cool. So you got your start on Next Generation by writing a screenplay. And I'm wondering what inspired you to do that, and how did you get it seen by the staff at Next Generation?
Well, I mean, I was a fan, and I was living in Los Angeles trying to be a writer, and Next Generation was on the air, and I taped the first two seasons and watched them religiously, and secretly dreaming, or not so secretly dreaming, that somehow, some way, I would be able to write for the show. But what happened was I just started dating a girl who discovered I was a Star Trek fan because I had Captain Kirk posters in my apartment, and she said, "Oh, I have a connection to the show," because she had worked on the pilot in the casting office, and she still knew. I wrote an episode called The Bonding, and I brought it with me on the set tour. And I got the guy that was giving the set tour to read it. His name was Richard Arnold, and he turned out to be one of Gene Roddenberry's assistants. And Richard liked it, and gave it to the woman that became my first agent. She submitted it to the show formally, and it sat in the slush pile of unsolicited scripts for about 7 months. And then Michael Piller came aboard to run the writing office beginning of the third season, started going through the slush pile. And I think Melinda Snodgrass was the one who actually found it and gave it to Michael, and bought it, produced it, asked me to do a second one. I did a second one, The Defector. And then after that, he asked me to come on full time as a staff writer. So it was an incredibly lucky and fortunate break. And it started my entire career.
What inspired The Bonding, the story?
It was interesting. At that point in the run of the show, again, this was like I wrote it probably midway through the second season's airing. I thought it was interesting that the Enterprise had all these families on board. But they didn't really do much with the families. They didn't do many stories about them. And I thought, well, it's an interesting idea if you're going to have, I didn't agree with it conceptually. I thought it was weird that they had all these families aboard. But anyway, I thought, well, if you're going to have these families aboard, what happens when somebody's parent dies? And I thought, well, that's an interesting story. And what if it's Worf? What if Worf is responsible, for the parent dying, and then he feels like he has to take responsibility for the orphan child, and that just kind of started the ball rolling. That was the beginning of the story.
You wrote some of the most amazing episodes of Next Generation over its run. but I want to specifically ask you about a couple of them. One of them is Relics. You got James Doohan to come back.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that. That's got to be the thrill, especially because you were a original series fan.
Oh, that was one of the big thrills of my entire tenure there. It was not just meeting Jimmy and getting to work with them, which was fantastic, and he was such a lovely man. But it was recreating the Enterprise. It was going down to the holodeck and recreating the bridge and the captain's chair, and that was an amazing moment when I could walk down to the soundstage. And we didn't build the whole thing; we built like a pie-shaped wedge of the Enterprise bridge. It was really the command chair and then the turbo lift and the rails, and I think the two consoles on either side. We actually had to rent the helm and navigator console from a fan who built it from scratch and lent it to us, or rented it to us technically for the show. And so I went down there, and I remember going down to the set, sitting in the captain's chair, feeling like this is unbelievable, and then looking up, and then Gene's wife was there. Majel Barrett, showed up, and then there was one of the producers of the original series, whose name is escaping me. Who was the great line producer of the original series? I can't remember his name. Sorry, I'm just blanking on his name. But it was the famous line producer of the original series showed up, and we were all sort of gathered there, looking at the recreated bridge of the Enterprise, and everyone was just really. It was very nostalgic, and it was very like celebratory, and it was really an amazing moment. And it was fun to write that script because the script was full of references to, original series scenes, and there's speeches in there that when Scotty's talking about events from the Naked Time and in other episodes, and it was a chance for me to throw in all my original series knowledge and just like sprinkle it through the whole show.
It is green, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. You wrote the best Q episode, Tapestry. Talk a bit about that.
That was fun. That was really the only full-on Q episode I got to do, other than the finale. And I don't remember the idea from it. I think Michael had something to do with Michael Piller, I believe, was in a conversation with Michael, and the story came out of some story conference. But I was very taken with the idea of doing one that was all about Picard realizing that, what he thought was a profound mistake in his youth turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to him, and it changed his life in profound and interesting ways. And it was very autobiographical for me because I had gone through, I'd flunked out of college, and that seemed like a disaster, and lost my Navy scholarship and my whole future. And I had come to LA sort of under a cloud to start over, and decided to be a writer because I had written as a child. But at the time, it seemed like my life had fallen apart, and it was just like a series of disasters. But when I was there at Star Trek, I realized that if not for those disasters, if I hadn't flunked out of college, if I hadn't came to LA in the way that I did and had to start over, I would have never made it to Star Trek. So it was like Tapestry was about that experience, and that's why I wanted to write it.
Oh, and it's such an amazing episode. And John Delancey is a genius too. You mentioned All Good Things. You talk about one of the perfect finales for a series. And I know you co-wrote that with Brannon. Talk a bit about that?
That was an interesting moment because neither Brannon nor I thought we were going to write the finale. The entire writing staff just assumed that Michael Piller would, give himself the finale, and we all expected that to happen. But the truth was, Michael was very busy with Deep Space Nine and maybe even the beginnings of Voyager at that point, and he just couldn't do it. And so he asked Brannon and I to write it, and we were thrilled and jumped on it. But we had just, we were completing almost a solid year at that point of working on Star Trek Next Generations, the first feature. So suddenly we were tackling another 2-hour episode with the exact same cast of characters at the same time. And whereas we spent a year working on Generations, we only had a month to work on All Good Things. And there were times when we were at Brandon's house or my house working, and we would be in the throes of a script and talking, and then we would lose track of which one we were working on because you were still with the same people and you were having some problem in engineering, or some disaster was happening, and we were like, wait a minute, which episode, which one is this? We're lost. But the great irony of it all is that All Good Things turned out wonderfully, and Generations less so. I think we were disappointed in Generations, and we were thrilled with All Good Things. It's just one of those great ironies that we spent all this time working on the big movie, but the little finale to the TV show came out so much better.
So I have to ask. First of all, Generations I enjoyed immensely, but you guys then wrote the best Next Generation film, First Contact. How did that come about?
It was very early. I think Generations was still in theaters, and Rick Berman came to us and said, "Hey, Paramount wants to do another one because the Generations had done very, very well financially." And they said, "Okay, they want to start working on the next one. Are you guys up for it?" And we said, "Yeah, let's do it." And the second one, we had learned a lot of lessons, and there were less strictures and requirements going into the second one. Into the first one, there was just a list of things that the first one had to be. It was almost like a laundry list of things that had to be in the first Next Gen movie. You could have the original cast in it, but only at the beginning. You had to have a Picard story and a Data story. You had to have the Klingons in it. You had to have a big villain like Khan. It had to be some time traveling without it. Time travel. It was like all this stuff that made it hard to construct a plot out of. But the second one, it was just, okay, what do you want to do? And then we were like, oh, great. All right. So we could just kind of start with a fresh page and just make a good movie. And it was much more fun. And everyone just enjoyed themselves a lot more. We all had a greater sense of confidence that, the Next Generation cast could translate well to the big screen. And we had a better sense of, what the look and feel of it was going to be and what the rhythm of that kind of a movie would be. And we tried to include more of the ensemble cast, in the story and give everybody something to do. And it was just a more fun, it was more of a fun movie to do.
I have to say, I'm loving your cat. What's your cat's name?
Yeah, I know. That's Jazargo. Jazargo the cat. Jazargo's named after one of the characters in Skyrim, and he's going to get through the door because he knows there's food on the other side of that door.
Oh, that's awesome. So you moved over to Deep Space Nine. How did that come about?
As Next Gen was winding down, and Michael had Deep Space and he had Voyager going, and there was a point where we were still in the last season, the 7th season of Next Gen, and Michael called me down. He just said, "What are you thinking? Have you given any thought to it?" And at that point, I was actually thinking more personally, like, I'm kind of interested in a new Star Trek show and what Voyager, I don't even know if it had a name at that point, what that would be like. And Michael just kind of said, I think actually you'd be good for Deep Space Nine. And I was a little surprised. I said, really? And he said, yeah, you know what? You really liked Ira and you worked well with Ira. And I think it appeals to your kind of storytelling. It's darker, it's more complicated, the characters are more ambiguous. He said, how much have you watched of it? And I said, honestly, not much. I'd seen the pilot and I maybe caught an episode here and there. He said, why don't you take some of the episodes home, watch them, see what you think. And I did. So I took them home, the episodes of the first 2 seasons. I think the second season wasn't complete, but it was most of the first 2. And I watched them, and I started to fall in love with the show and really get into the characters. And I did really like and respect working with Ira Bear. And yeah, I'll go do this. And it was the best thing I could have done.
What was the thought process to bring Worf back into Deep Space Nine? And why are you the man who writes Klingons so well?
Well, I got, the Klingon thing was was kind of an accident. It was literally on my first day as a staff writer when I came to Next Generation. Michael called me, he said, okay, I'm going to give you a stack of things to go work on. And one of them was the spec script for yesterday's Enterprise. And then there were these 2 Worf stories. One was Sins of the Father, and one was called My Brother's Keeper. And he wanted to see if there was a way to combine the 2 Klingon stories into one story. So I combined those elements of both those stories. One had the brother story in it, and one had the backstory with Worf's father and going back to the Klingon homeworld. So I combined the 2 into one story. And once I had done that and started working on it, Michael asked me to write a memo to him that was, just tell me about who the Klingons are and who the Romulans are, because I don't really know them, because you have to remember Michael was new to the whole Star Trek universe. So I wrote this multi-page memo of what I thought the Klingons were and what I thought the Romulans were. And then after that point, I became like the go-to guy on those stories. And especially because Sons of the Father ended not really with a cliffhanger, but with an open-ended story that Worf had, lost his honor and someday he may have to regain it. You knew there was going to be a follow-up to that. So then I was a natural one to write the follow-up to that, to the redemption two-parter. And from that point on, it was just like I was the Margaret Mead of the Klingon Empire. I mean, it was just, I was the go-to person for those stories, and I really liked them and I enjoyed them. And it was great it allowed you to write in a different key. I could write these big operatic samurai kind of tales with this, the Klingons and Worf as the, it's almost like the Spock character, sort of torn between two worlds, which is always fascinating. So I really enjoyed that. Now, Deep Space Nine, Worf came to Deep Space Nine. It was partly out of Paramount, Paramount feeling like they wanted to do something to goose the ratings and wanted to sort of bring in more of the next generation fans. It's all interesting looking back retrospectively. Now it's like, Deep Space is considered, a great show and very successful, and people keep discovering it and so on. But back in that moment, it was sort of, officially, and from Paramount's point of view, it was like the show that wasn't doing very well. And it was in between the huge success of Next Generation and what they thought was going to be the huge success of Voyager. And there was this other show, Deep Space Nine. And why can't they just get it together? And why can't they bring in more of those fans? So they were pushing things. They wanted us to do something. They were like, I kid you not, some executive said, well, why don't you put some rockets onto the space station and fly it through the galaxy? It doesn't have to stay in one place anymore. So you were dealing with things like that. And out of a way to kind of find a way not to strap rockets to the space station and fly it around, what else can we do, we said. And so the idea came up, I think it came out of a conversation with Michael, Rick, and Ira hatched it, or at least they presented it to Ira, and then we talked about it internally and what it would do to the dynamics of the show and the characters, and we just went, all right, let's go for it. And then we brought him in and then accept him as part of the family, and then I, again, because I was familiar with the character and written so much of the Klingon tales to date, then I wrote, some of the Klingon stories on Deep Space as well.
Well, you got to write Tacking in the Wind, which is a season 7 episode that sort of finishes the Gowron arc and the Martok as well. I got to ask you about that because it's a fantastic episode. And when I asked others what their favorite Deep Space Nine episode was, that's one of the ones they mentioned consistently. Really? Yeah, absolutely. So talk a bit about that episode.
I just remember, I don't remember too much about the writing of it sitting here at this moment, but I do remember kind of feeling like this was probably going to be the last one I did. I was aware of that at the time because the whole show was, starting to wind down. And I was aware that I probably wasn't going to write any more of these big epic Klingon tales again. So I really wanted to embrace those, especially those two characters of Gowron and Martok, and really get inside of them more and really sort of challenge our ideas of, what it meant to be number one in the Klingon Empire, and ambition and regret and all those kinds of things. And it was just, I do remember really enjoying it, and it was really a lot of fun to get to do one more, before I left the show.
Can you give me some insights into the Trials and Tribulations episode for the 30th anniversary of Trek?
Yeah, Ira came to us and said, okay, it's the 30th anniversary, and Voyager is doing something, and are we going to do something, and what would it be? And I think we knew at that time that they were doing Sulu, and they were going to go that direction. And so what is our version? And we kicked around some ideas. My version that I wanted to do is I wanted to go back to Iosha, the planet featured in a piece of the action, and that when our Enterprise pulled up to Iosha, that we would discover that they had become a planet of Star Trek fans. Based on their encounters with Kirk and Spock, and that they were such an imitative society, and it was like you would go to the planet of the fans, and they would almost be having conventions. They would have had known the stories and the voyages and all this kind of stuff. It was kind of a funny idea, but I was really the only one in love with it. And it was actually Renee Echevarria who came up with the idea of putting our characters into an original series episode, and we had tinkered around with it a little bit with relics in terms of putting us into footage from the original series. And I think Renee pitched it as, why don't we do the Forrest Gump gag? Let's do Forrest Gump with us in an old episode. And everyone kind of got excited. And I think I think Renee says I'm the one that came up with doing it with Trouble with Tribbles, because I think the first image I had in my head was us being up in the storage cargo bay and throwing the Tribbles out the hatch, and that those were the Tribbles that were hitting Kirk on the head, and everybody laughed. And then it was like one thing after another. It was like, oh, I'm gonna do the lineup where Kirk is walking down the line and he's yelling at his crewmen after the barroom fight, and then we put our guys in that lineup, and the possibilities would just start to explode. And it was the original show was a fun one, and it was like one of the few comedies they ever did. And we could have fun with it too, and we could recreate those sets, and we could recreate some Enterprise sets, and it was just we all got really excited about it. And then it became, about the production possibilities and how hard it would be and how much we could afford to do. And then there were technical things about, no one had really tried to do the Forrest Gump gag on a TV series budget and do as much of it as what we were talking about doing, of putting our characters literally in it. So it was pushing the technology at the time, which was really pre-CGI. It wasn't really something we could use at that point to do a gag like this. Then there was getting the old footage, and then there were all the rights issues. You had to, approach all the original cast members for the rights, and it was on and on and on. All these obstacles in our way, but we cleared every one of them, and ultimately everyone who worked on it got really excited about it, and we spent way more than we officially did. Like, we got a bigger budget for the show, and I think departments hid money and stole money and totally cheated their budgets because everybody wanted to do the show and do it right and do it in a big way. And it was just one of those amazing things to be part of. I mean, it was fun. You'd walk down to the sound stages, and you could walk down the corridor of the Enterprise. We've got a stretch of original Enterprise corridor, and you got to do stuff like that, and to see our cast members wearing those costumes and to play with the props and the tricorder and all of it. It was such a thrill. And as a fan, it was just like, it was the best. It was just an amazing thing to literally recreate a piece of your memory and to recreate something that was so important to me, growing up, and still was. And it was a thrill.
And I love the fact that you were able to even have Sisko meet Kirk at the end.
Yeah.
Brilliant. And I remembered the episode, the original one, where you used the Kirk footage, and I thought, oh man, I'm loving this. So you guys did an amazing job.
Yeah, it was tricky because we were hunting. It was hard to find something. We wanted the two men to encounter each other, but it was tricky to find a piece of footage where we could literally put them together, in a set that we were creating, where the eye lines were going to match, and where you could see him walking. You wanted Sisko to walk into the frame so that there was the key was you had to have a two shot of them in this frame at the same time. And then it also had to have coverage going each way. So you had to have coverage going towards Kirk and coverage going towards Sisko. And we needed it to be on the bridge, and there weren't like any really random encounters in the hallways of the original series anyway. So it was really tricky coming up with something that was an encounter that would play as sort of oh, who are you? And kind of let Sisko say what he wanted to, and then have Kirk sort of accept it and sort of feel, that he had honored what Sisko said. Because so many of those, if you think back, there's so many times when Kirk was encountering somebody on the bridge, but it was usually in a confrontation, or it was like Spock or McCoy, where the tone would have been very different. And there weren't that many introductions, but that little clip from Mirror Mirror just perfectly sat in it because of the way he played it and the way it was set up. And it all worked really well.
It was such an amazing experience as a fan, and just in terms of the production level you guys went to. Fantastic job.
Thank you.
I was sad to see Deep Space Nine end, of course, and I was also sad to see that it didn't continue into films like I was hoping it would, like Next Generation did. Was there a reason for that?
Well, the Next Gen cast had taken over the features at that point when we ended our run, and like I said earlier, Paramount thought of us as the stepchild of the franchise, and that we weren't quite as popular, and they never really liked the show as much as they liked the other shows, which were just easier for them to wrap their minds around. And so even at the time, they said, well, yeah, there might be features someday. Sure, we might do that. But we all kind of knew that wasn't in the cards. So none of us had that as an illusion. As we were writing and constructing the last season, we just said, we're going to end it. We're going to end the show because we don't think that we weren't holding out any hope that there was going to be some feature down the line. We knew it was going to be the next gen cast. And once the next gen cast had finished, the assumption was that the Voyager cast would take the next round.
Gotcha. I'm one of those folks that pays attention to the writing credits. I'll admit that right away. So I always look for your name or someone else that I really like. And I was thrilled to see your name pop up in a Voyager episode after Deep Space Nine ended. Could you talk a bit about your brief stint on Voyager?
Yeah, it was brief. It was unhappy. It was a misstep. I shouldn't have gone to Voyager. I mean, the truth is, I'd done 10 years at Star Trek, and I should have just walked away after Deep Space Nine ended. But the truth was, at the time, I was very comfortable there. They paid me well. I had a great office. I loved Star Trek and the universe, and it was the easy thing to do. It was just to keep going and just do another. And Brandon and I had talked, and had worked, for many years on again, off again partnership. So it seemed like, yeah, sure, why not? But truth was, when I got there, for a variety of reasons, it just didn't gel. I think I came in with the wrong attitude. I don't think Brandon handled it well. I don't think I handled it well. And after a couple of months, it was just clear that this was, I decided to leave. And it was hard at the time. I was very unhappy, and a lot of anger and all, bad feelings. But as time went by, I realized that it was my fault for going in the first place, and I didn't bear him any ill will, and I don't bear Brandon any ill will to this day. And it was just, it was something I shouldn't have done. And again, sort of like in our discussion at Tapestry, it turned out to be one of the best things I ever did, because leaving the show at that moment allowed me to go on to Roswell and then Carnival and then create Battlestar Galactica, which was an amazing thing, and I don't regret it all. And if I'd stuck around at Star Trek, I wouldn't have been able to do that.
How did Battlestar come about? Because I have to admit, I was a bit hesitant at first. It's like, oh, you're rebooting Battlestar? But I quickly became enamored by it, and I loved your vision of it. How did that come about?
It was in like January, February 2002. I got a call from David Icke, who was a network executive I had known briefly, and then he had transitioned to a production deal at Universal. And he called me and said, hey, Universal's looking for someone to do a new take on Battlestar Galactica in their library. There had been attempts to redo it over the years, and none of them had worked. And was I interested? And I wasn't sure, because I had been at Star Trek for so long, and I'd just gotten out of all of science fiction generally. And I hadn't seen the original in a very long time. And I said, okay, let me think about it. And I went and rented the Battlestar pilot, which you could rent on VHS at that point. And I took it home and watched it over a weekend. And I'm watching it just a couple of months after the 9/11 attacks. And so when you're watching the original Battlestar pilot with that context, it changes completely. And I realized if you redid the series at that point in time, the audience would take it very differently. The whole notion of an apocalyptic attack by your enemies and then running away from them in the dark of the night. And it was just like, there were all these resonances to everything that was happening in American society and around the world. And I saw it as an opportunity. I was like, wow, you could do something really interesting and really meaningful here, and do some powerful social commentary. And then it was also an opportunity for me to sort of do a bunch of things that have been bubbling around in my head since Deep Space Nine, things butting up against the limitations of Star Trek and its style of photography and editing, and the fact that, the characters could only be so morally ambiguous, and, graphic content and sexuality and all kinds of things that I was like struggling with by the end of my tenure at Trek. I had told myself, when I get my show, I'm going to do things differently. And this was an opportunity to do that. So it was like marrying those two things became Battlestar Galactica.
What made you decide to give directing a try?
It just became something that I was always asked about. Do you ever want to direct? And I certainly thought about it over the years, but it never seemed quite the right time and opportunity. And but at a certain point, I did sort of feel like I would like to try this. I want to see if this is like, excuse me. Some point, I did want to try it, and I decided if I'm going to do it, I should do it on my own show with my own crew and cast that'll support me and help me and make sure I don't make an idiot out of myself. So I decided to do it in the last year of Battlestar and write the episode, and it was fantastic. I definitely enjoyed it. It was, I always said it was surprisingly relaxing. I found because show running is such a you're multitasking constantly. You're constantly giving notes and getting notes and reading emails and reading more scripts and having a production meeting and getting a call from the studio network and going down to the stage and watching dailies and going to post. And you're just constantly doing this churn of so many things. There was something very zen about going to the sound stage, and this is all I'm going to do today. I'm going to shoot these scenes, and I can give my total focus just to these scenes. And they don't want you to do anything else. They don't want you to leave the soundstage. They don't want you to answer your phone. They don't want you to do an email. You're there to do this. And I found that refreshing and great, and it was a lot of fun. So I did a second one at Caprica, and I thought about doing it again. I'm sure I'll do it again. But I just love show running, and I love the writing process. And the truth is, as a showrunner, if you put yourself in a directing slot on the show, you take yourself out of all the other elements, and it's other people then have to pick up the slack. And then I can't go to story meetings, then I can't deal with the network, then I can't go to post or look at other cuts. It's like that singular focus prevents you from doing all the other jobs as a showrunner. So it's always kind of a tricky thing to put yourself in a directing slot.
Well, I have to ask you about your acting now. You were on a CSI episode, and
quote acting.
well, and I immediately recognized you both in Deep Space Nine as well as on Battlestar, the finale.
Yeah.
Why the acting? Just curious.
Oh, it was just a lark. It was fun. It was like, why not? Why not be in the show? It's a very Hitchcockian kind of thing moment. You just kind of want to put yourself in the universe a little bit, and it's also I think it's also seizing part of it for yourself in a different way. As a writer, they're my words on those episodes, and my credit is there, and I'll always have it. But there's something about being in the universe. You want to seeing yourself in the universe of Battlestar Galactica or in Deep Space Nine or in these places puts you there in a very different way, and it was really fun, and I'm glad I did it, but it's not going to be my next career.
Well, I'm hoping to see you pop up in finales of other shows that you've been working on. So just saying. Outlander's a bit of a departure, even though there are time travel elements to it. So I'm wondering, how did you get involved with Outlander?
Outlander came about because my wife, Terry, and my producing partner, Meryl Davis, and I were having dinner in Vancouver as Battlestar was winding down. We were just talking about future projects and passion projects and, what else to do. And Terry and Meryl both separately and unknown to each other were huge fans of the book series. And they had never really talked about it. And somehow it came up and they got very excited. And they said to me, oh, you should definitely read these because this could be right up your alley. You like history, you like historical fiction, you like strong female roles. And I said, okay. And so I read it, and reading the first book, I just went, oh yeah, I definitely see this as a show. I immediately saw how to divide it up in episodes and who the main characters were and, what the general narrative was going to be, because it laid out very well as a series. And that was kind of it. Then I took it to Sony, and we pitched it to Stars, and off we went.
That is so cool, and big fan as well.
Thank you.
And Diana's a friend of mine, actually. So,
right.
Yeah, she's terrific. Talk about For All Mankind, how that came about, because I love alternate history, and when I saw you were involved with this, I thought, I got to get Apple Plus. So how did that come about?
Zach Van Amberg, who used to be head of Sony Television for many years, and I had talked at one point, maybe 6 years ago, I'd have a casual conversation about Skylab. And he was talking about how when he was a kid, he remembered Skylab and He was kind of enamored of it, and wouldn't it be cool to do a show about NASA in the 70s? And we didn't take the conversation much further than that. It didn't come up again. So flash forward several years, Zach left Sony to become one of the heads of Apple TV Plus. And when he did that, he called me over to his office and said, hey, let's talk. So I came over and he said, I still think about that NASA in the 70s idea. What do you think about, what if we did it? What if we made a Mad Men type show set at NASA? And I said, that's really interesting. Let me go think about it. So when I thought about it, I realized kind of quickly that you could do that show. You could do a Mad Men show that was set at NASA in the 1970s and just do it as a straight up character piece. But to me, as a space fan, the story of NASA in the 70s is really kind of a depressing one. The budgets keep getting cut, the ambition keeps getting smaller and smaller. The big ideas of moon bases and going to Mars and expanding our footprint into the solar system just went away, and it got smaller and smaller and smaller, and it was just the space shuttle, and that was as far as it was going to go. And I went back to Zach and said, instead of doing that show, what if we did the version of the space program that I thought we were going to get when I was a kid? What if we did the alternate history version where we really did keep going, where we had the moon bases and where we sort of put ourselves on the path to Star Trek, where it became a much bigger, brighter future because we went more strongly into space. And he said, well, why would we have, okay, but why would that would have happened? Why would they have done it after Apollo 11? And I said, well, what if we lost the race to the moon? If the Russians had beat us there at the end, what would have happened? And he kind of looked at me and said, that's really interesting. I said, yeah, because if the Russians had beat us to the moon, I think there would have been a huge backlash in the country. People would have been angered and freaked out and threatened. And I think we would have redoubled our efforts to catch up again, because we've been beaten by them in all the major, milestones of the space race. And to lose the race to the moon at the last minute would have been the ultimate insult. And it just felt like it would have given Nixon and then, an excuse to get out of Vietnam faster. It would have pivoted the whole Cold War to a different Cold War competition in space. And, it just felt plausible and interesting to sort of go that direction. And there was something really fun and different about doing an alternate history piece that wasn't dystopian, that wasn't, the Nazis win World War II, or it wasn't, the Confederates win the Civil War. Not that there's anything wrong with that kind of storytelling at all. Man in the High Castle is a great show, but it's there. Instead of doing one that was about how terrible things would be if history was different, I thought it was interesting to do one about how great things could be if history was different.
I'm a big fan, and I can't wait for season 2 to start, and I'm hoping you got them all done before all this happened.
Not quite. We had 2 episodes still to go. So we have 8 episodes in the can, and we had started filming the last 2 when we stopped. So we still have a couple to complete.
Gotcha. Whatever happened to the Wild Wild West reboot that I heard that you were working on? I wanted to see that.
Oh, I desperately wanted to do that. Narain Shankar and I wrote the pilot. CBS bought it, but they just declined to pick it up. It was one of the great disappointments of my career because I was such a fan of the original show. And Narain and I actually got to talk to Robert Conrad on the phone a couple of times, which was really a kick. He passed away not too long ago, obviously, but we did get a chance to talk with him. And he was one of my childhood heroes as well. I was always struck by the James T. West and the James T. Kirk of it all. And I was like, how did that happen exactly?
Oh, that's I didn't even think about that.
Yeah,
his name was Tiberius. It's like, yeah, no.
Yeah.
What do you see as the future of Star Trek, and why do you think it's endured for so long?
Well, it's just one of the great. It's such a bold and original idea. I mean, the mission statement in the original narration opening says it all. It's a call to the final frontier, to boldly go, to explore strange new worlds. I mean, it's the great. Come with us now on one of the great epic adventures into the vast unknowns of space. I mean, it's kind of an irresistible concept. And then the original format was so flexible that literally you could do a different kind of show every week, which we did on Next Gen as well. That this week you can do a romance, and next week you're doing a time travel piece, and this week you're doing a scientific investigation, and then you're doing mind control aliens, and you just do all these different. It's such a flexible format. It's such a big canvas to really play with big science fiction ideas and very human interpersonal ideas at the same time. And you have this ship that is its own culture and its own community with this authority figure at the top, and then his or her friends surrounding them on the bridge, and they're all dedicated to being the best of the best and holding up certain ideals of liberal Western civilization and democracy and doing the right thing and asking tough questions. And it's such a great format that it's not surprising that it continues to fascinate people. It's just a great one. It's one of the great series of all time.
My last thing for you is, could you give me a live long and prosper and then a kapla?
Sure. Live long and prosper. Kapla.
That is phenomenal. Thank you. Hang on one second. I'm going to stop recording here.